Hello and welcome back. Today, one of my biggest irritations, one of the things that drives me crazy is when people are in a math class and they don't understand how their average is calculated. They don't understand weighted averages, and your teacher's a math instructor, so they do understand weighted averages. And so what I've done is just kind of given two examples here. I want to explain how you come up with your average before your final exam is taken and after your final exam is taken. So let's say you've got homework is worth 20% of your grade, and quizzes are worth 15% of your grade, and tests are worth 40% of your grade, and your final exam is worth 25% of your grade. And this is very similar to a grading scale that I use. And so what I want to go through is how to calculate your weighted average. And a weighted average means that the quizzes and the homework and the tests don't all equal each other, which I find is quite common in a college level course. And we're not going to give you the same credit for homework as we do for a test. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find your homework average, your quiz average, and your test average. Okay? So the way to do that is really simple. I've given you these homework scores: 75, 80, 90, 95, 100, 100, 180, and 90. Okay? And the way to do this is real simple. Your homework, let me write this out actually, your homework average is going to be to add up all of these scores, and divide by the number of homeworks. Well, when I add up those scores, I get a total of 810 points. And if you count these assignments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I count 9 assignments. So your homework average is going to be 810 divided by 9. And 810 divided by 9 comes out to be exactly 90. So that's your homework average. Okay? Then we have to find your quiz average. Okay? So we're going to add your quiz grades together. Well, your quiz grades, 72, 83, 90, and 45. You have 4 quizzes. We're going to add those up, and I get a total of 290. And we're going to divide that by 4 because there are 4 of them. And your quiz average comes out to be 72.5. Okay? So you've got a homework average, you've got a quiz average. And I'm going to circle these because they're very, very important to us. And the last one is your test average. Okay? And I'm going to add up your 3 test scores. Your test scores are a 41, a 58, and a 70. When we add those 3 up, we get 169. And 169 divided by 3 tests, you get 56.33. And this could keep going and going and going, but 56.33 is good enough. Okay? Now, we want to find your average. Now, this is important. This is very, very important. I'm going to put a big star next to this. Okay? The final exam has not been taken yet. Okay? If the final has been taken, you use percentages and you add up your scores, and that's your final score. There's an extra step if you have not taken at least one item from each category in your grade book. Now, here's the way we're going to do this. Real simple. Your number of points, okay, points, is going to equal your average times the weight. Okay? Now, if you had taken your final exam, so you have homework, you have quizzes, you have tests, and you have final exam. You have 4 categories. If you had taken an assignment from all 4 categories, so if you'd taken homework and a quiz and a test and a final exam, this would be your average, these points that I'm about to show you. Because we haven't taken one item, at least one item from every category, we're going to have an extra step. Okay? So here's what you do. You take your homework average, 90 times 0.2. And why 0.2? Because homework is 20%. Okay? Plus quiz average, 72.5 times 0.15. Why 0.15? Because quizzes are 15%. Plus your test average, 56.33, times 0.4. Now, if you take those three, 90 times 20% is 18, and 72.5 times 15% is 10.875, and 56.33 times 40%, you get something like 22.53 points. So you add those up, okay, and your points equal 51.41, roughly. Now listen closely, folks. What this means is, at this point in the course, if you have taken every homework, every quiz, every test, you have accumulated 51 points. If the final exam is 25% of your grade, it is worth a total of 25 points. So if you add 25 to that, okay, a 100, a perfect score on the final, will add 25 points to that number, which basically gives you a 76. What this is telling you is, going into the final exam, the best you can do is a 76. And that's if you make a perfect score on the final. And I use this really to tell people how well they can do, how well it's possible for them to do, okay? Now, this isn't your average. This is your total number of points. If you want to know your average, in other words, if your instructor decided, you know what, guys, we're not going to have a final exam. What you got is what you got. Well, hopefully you wouldn't get a 51 because you haven't completed all the requirements for the course. Well, how much of the course have you completed? Well, if you look at 20 plus 40, that makes 60. Add another 15, that's 75. You have completed 75% of the graded material in the course. So to find your average, you're going to take your number of points divided by what I call points attempted. Now, what that means is 51.41 points. That's how many points you have earned. And points attempted. Well, homework's 20, tests are 40, quizzes are 15. You have attempted 20 plus 15 plus 40. You have attempted 75% of the course. So in other words, if you made a perfect 100 on the homework, it's worth 20 points. If you made a perfect 100 on the quizzes, they're worth 15 points. If you made a perfect 100 on the test, they're worth 40 points. If you made 100 on everything, you would have 75 points. Okay? Okay? So 51.41 divided by 75, and guess what you get? You get 0.685, which is the same as 68.5%. What this means is that at this exact moment, with those grades going into the final, you have an average of a 68.5. Okay? So that's your average. That's the average the instructor would give you going into the final, would be a 68.5. Now, if you score a perfect score on the final, that's going to be this number plus 25. So you can bring this 68.5 up to a 76.4. So you can go from a D average to a C average if you score a perfect score. If you score a 0 on the final, say you don't come, well, you're going to go from this average, right? Because you're going to take that final, you're going to add it to this 51. Well, if you don't get any points from the final, your average is going to go from 68.5, a D, down to 51.4, which is an F. So very, very important to understand that when an instructor gives you your average, 68, if you don't show up for the final, you don't get a 68 in the class. Okay? Because that adds 25 more points down here. So instead of saying 51 divided by 75, now you're going to say 51 divided by 100, which is 0.51, which is 51%, which is, ta-da, the grade, the number of points you had. So that's how you find a weighted average before the final. I want to take a different set of numbers and I want to find the weighted average after the final. Now, let's say you have your homework, you have your quizzes, you have your tests, you have your final. They all count the same as above. Homework is 20, quizzes are 15, tests are 40, and the final exam is 25%. Now, very, very similar to above. What we're going to do is we're going to find averages. We have to find a homework average. We have to find a quiz average. So the homework average is going to be add up your homework scores, divide by the number of homeworks. Well, if you add up these homeworks, they come up to 903 points, and there are 10 of them. So it's 90.3. If you take your quiz grades and you add them up, your quiz grades add up to 422. And there are also there are 5 of them. And that's going to give you roughly an 84.4 average. And you're going to take your tests and you're going to find their average. And if you add up your 3 tests, they add up to 156. And if you divide that by 3, you get a test average of 52. And so now, just like above, we're going to take each of these averages and multiply them. So I'm going to say, okay, fine. My number of points is going to equal 90.3 times 20%, because that's what my homework's worth, plus 84.4 times 15%, because that's what my quizzes are worth, plus 52 times 40%, because that's what my tests are worth, plus, now this time you took the final. Here's the final. You took it. You got a 75. So you're going to take that final exam score and multiply it by 25%. Now, do the math for a second. 20% plus 15% plus 40% plus 25%. What do you have? You have attempted 100% of the coursework. Now, what that means is that when you find your number of points, and I'm going to write these down below. This will be 18.06. This will be 12.66. This will be 20.8. And this will be 18.75. When you add all of those up, you get 70.27. Now, this time you notice I didn't divide by a number. I just took that answer and wrote it down. Why? Well, how many points have I attempted? I've attempted all 100 points. Well, if you take 70 and divide it by 100, you get 0.70, which is 70%, which is your average. So once you get your final exam score, it's really easy to find your average. You take your homework average times whatever your homework is worth. You take your quiz average times whatever your quizzes are worth. You take your test average times whatever your tests are worth. You got to remember to convert your percents to decimals. And you take your final exam grade, one score, because you only have one final exam, and you multiply it by 0.25. So you get 70.27, and that'll be your average. It's actually easier to calculate once you've taken at least one grade from each category. And you can apply this to a class where you have maybe projects or you have, whatever be the case. And it's always going to be the average of those scores times the percentage of the weight of the scores in your instructor syllabus. So it's a fun little exercise here, finding your weighted grade or your weighted average in a class. It's very important. You should always calculate your own averages because, on a rare occasion, your instructors are human beings and they do make mistakes. And you really never know when you're going to, calculate your average and say, I get something different than my instructor got. And you should always, ask and not be afraid to ask, because the worst thing your instructor is going to do is sit down and show you his calculation or her calculation and show you why your average is what it is. But we do make mistakes, and so it's important that you be able to calculate that and make sure that your average is correct. Okay, So if you have any questions, please let me know, and hopefully this will help you in some of your classes.